In the Gita portion of this reading, it's very interesting because he says, to those who love me, I will give them discernment. And we often sort of have these ideas as if they're contradictory instead of just one. How do we develop the capacity to discern those actions and those attitudes which are really going to take us where we're trying to go, which is closer to God? And people get in their minds, well, I'm a bhakti, I'm not really a jnani, and we sort of think it all as separate. But the Gita just makes it very different. It starts with love, and then once that love is given, then the grace comes for us also to understand what to do. It's a very interesting sequence there, actually. And when Swamiji is talking in the further expanded commentary on this verse about what it means to receive, he quotes Jesus elsewhere in the Bible where Jesus says, those who are pure in heart, those are the ones that will see God. And so we sort of realize that all of this, excuse me, there you are. That it all has to work as one piece. That there's no way that we can't fool God. We can't just take the part that's comfortable to us and think that that's all that we're going to have to do. And what this whole... So now the only problem I have is but one way or another we'll manage. Of all the times I've struggled with my voice, this is by far the worst. Get me some hot water, could you? Yeah, please do. When Jesus says to all those who received him, and the result of him of receiving God is the word power. I mean, there's just a lot of interesting words here. You give love, you receive discernment. And then you receive, and what you get is power. I mean, it's moving the whole thing way out of our little organized picture. And what we have to understand, I think, about the whole of spirituality, it isn't accessible with the mind. You just can't sort of go at it in the same way that we go at everything else. We start on the spiritual path, and it's fascinating to me now. This is the wonderful good news, is that spirituality is becoming so all-pervasive in our particular culture right now, this part of the world, I mean. Everybody's trying to find a way to get a hold of it. And in the marvelous American system, everybody sees a business opportunity. So we start, thank you. I'm seeing all these consciousness apps now, seriously, where you have some system, and sincere, well-meaning people have just sort of seen how, I haven't yet had the nerve to really look into what any of these might be, but I'm sure that they're all in positive directions, and it all depends on who you are and where you're standing and what's of benefit to you. I mean, it probably comes down on the level of positive thinking and keeping your consciousness where it should be, and all of those are extremely good things. I'd rather people did yoga postures for health than not do yoga postures at all, or be mindful so that they can advance in their careers rather than being empty-headed. We look for what it is that we want, and we don't give up what we think will make us happy until we find out whether it does. I mean, that's the discernment, that when we give love to God, he gives us discernment. But we don't really get that discernment until we begin to give love. And that's why in the Beatitudes, where blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, many other qualities have many other effects. But actual God consciousness, you have to start with love. And one of the reasons we have to start with love, as strangely as it descended, now it has departed. One of the reasons we have to start with love is because we have to somehow recognize that our self-interest is not really being interested in ourselves. And that's, we think of self-interest. I'm always calculating my own position in this and figuring out where I stand. It's a very, extremely difficult habit to get over. When I was in my first years at Ananda, I was serviceful and energetic and happy by nature, so I liked being involved in doing things. I wasn't self-serving, but I was very self-aware, self-conscious, self-interested. And I was always, the way I realized it in retrospect, I was always calculating my own advantage in any situation. And what that meant was, if something looked like more fun to me, I would just go do it. And then if this looked like more fun, I would go do it. Fortunately, what looked like fun to me was, oh, I'll go help out in the garden, and now this one needs a little bit of help with their moving, and then there's a problem in the market, and then I'll go do this. All of which I was supposed to be going to the office. You know, I remember one particular day I set out at 8 in the morning to go to the office, and I got there at 4. And it wasn't like I'd wasted time in between, but there was always something more, interesting along the way. And that was the point at which I realized I really needed to be able to be more focused. Because once we start loving, we start developing discernment. We start giving of ourselves. We begin to have experience about what gives us joy and what doesn't give us joy. Because that's really what discernment is. Discernment is, it can get very subtle and very philosophical. But what we're always trying to find out is, who am I really? And where does my happiness come from? And that's the only thing that we really need to discern. Because if we can tell that, then everything else will follow naturally. Where does my happiness come from? From concentrating, from doing good work, from being energetic, from not being lazy, all of those different things. But we get very mixed up about where it really comes from. We think it comes from making ourselves secure in this world, from having other people do what we want them to do, from being able to set up our little systems and have them just keep running. The idea that everything in this world changes, but not in my world. I'll just get mine organized and put enough will out and then I'll be fine. But what happens when we start loving is that our center of self moves over. Whether you're loving a child, whether you're loving your work, whether you're just loving other people in your lives, all of a sudden, your sphere of what's important gets bigger. I was remembering Viktor Frankl, who's he was a psychiatrist, and the beginning of his professional life was actually when he was incarcerated in a concentration camp as a Jew in Vienna. And when he was swept into the dragnet of all the people being taken away, and they were just in the first horrible throes of this, and the guards were taking everything away from them, he watched his fellow prisoners, many of whom were very well-to-do, try to hold on to diamonds and rubies and gold jewelry. They were people of wealth, and they wanted to keep their wealth, to keep their freedom is what it meant to them, so they could have choices. But he watched them all clinging to that, and none of that mattered to him. What mattered to him was the manuscript he'd been working on. Because he was an intellectual, and his intellectual output was his wealth. And he had this thick manuscript hidden in his coat, because it was the last thing he wanted to have lost. And at some point, somebody just ripped it out of his coat and threw it onto the trash heap like that, just gone. And in that moment, it was the transforming moment for him of the whole experience, because he realized that everything was lost as far as he was concerned. And what came from that, and this was what he followed for the rest of the time, and he was one of the few to survive in the camp that he was in, is that he surrendered And he realized that it was impossible for him to discern what he should do. He just couldn't tell anymore. So he doesn't in his book talk about God, but you can feel that there's a power that he's really listening to. And he begins to listen to a power that's greater than himself. And there's that word power, isn't there? That when we receive, what we receive is an understanding that there's a force much bigger than me. And it's a paradox on the spiritual path for many of us, because in order to come to the understanding that I've reached the limit of my understanding, you have to be very dynamic in that. In the discipleship vow that Swami wrote, which is really quite long, it's really the sort of the saga of a soul, too long did I just try to do this on my own. And now I've found out that unless your power infuses me, nothing that I do ever really comes out right. So then what you have is you have very powerful, self-directed individuals. I mean, whether we're powerful in the world or not, it doesn't matter. We have this strength in ourselves. And we've tried it and we've pushed it as far as we can push it, but then we've still found that it doesn't work. And we have to begin to love something other than ourselves. We have to imagine first that there is something to love, and then we have to become entranced by that, enamored by that. And it comes to us in many ways. Swami Kriyananda tells the story, and he told it many, many times, especially toward the end of his life. It was all he ever wanted to talk about. And he talked about finding Autobiography of a Yogi and seeing Master's picture, just the eyes and the consciousness that came out of it. And something suddenly just went out of him into Yogananda, and he recognized him. And he recognized some consciousness. This was all before he read the book. He just recognized something in there that was so attractive to him. I mean, that's the beginning of how we love, isn't it? When something attracts us. I mean, whether it's art or music or people or serving people, but something attracts us. And Swami talks about how he took that book off the shelf and was in this bookstore in New York, and he'd been searching so intensely for so long, and finally he'd found something. And there was this very worldly man, just an old classmate of his, Master's joke at this point. And this very worldly fellow talks about, the career he's going to follow and the money he's going to get and the house he's going to have. And it was sort of like right in front of Swamiji. He's literally holding his salvation against his heart. And this man is presenting the alternative. The alternative that Swamiji's whole social group would take. Swami wasn't in a very elite, in the business world and in the strata of wealth. He was in a very elite category, and they were all expected to just go there. Swami's holding Master like this, and this alternative is right in front of him. And Swami describes it so sweetly. He says, somehow this unknown yogi and I had become allies. We had become allies against this reality. Swami had given his heart to Master without even knowing why. And then the discernment was given to him. He could tell. He suddenly had a point of reference. He could tell the difference. But then he read Autobiography of a Yogi, left everything behind. He was 22 years old in 1948. This was not a common thing to do. He left everything behind, took the bus to Los Angeles, because he received Master, and then he had the power to do it. And that's what we're always working with, because isn't that what we struggle with? We don't have the power to do it. We know that we should meditate. We know we should be disciplined. We know we should overcome this selfish inclination, this lingering antagonism, this disappointment, this longing, all of these different things. We know we should, but we don't have the power to do it. Isn't that the problem? So this is what's being said to us. The promise is self-realization, but self-realization isn't just like that. Self-realization is this gradually rising sun within us. so that the dawn comes just a little at a time. There's this glorious morning light that we have here this time of year. If you're ever just looking outside, just when that is beginning to come, and it's so exquisite when it begins to come. And that's what happens with us, the dawning awareness like this. And with that dawning awareness, this power comes into us. And what's so interesting about the power that comes into us is, once it comes in, it's like it's our own. We receive the possibility of God's consciousness, and then this power comes into us. The power to discern, the power to discipline, the power to renounce if necessary, to embrace divine light, and the power to do it, then it becomes our own experience. This is the fascinating thing about the path. We're never passive in this. This is where Master talks continuously about this word attunement, which is, it's almost like a magical word. Some of you will leave the path, but it doesn't have to happen if you remain in tune. And we can't really push that attunement. I think it always has to come back to love. We have to grow gradually to love this vibration. This is why we come together in satsang. This is why we have the pictures of the masters. This is why we have the music. We have to gradually learn to love this vibration. In all our relationships, that's what we're working with all the time, isn't it? To try to really love what's around us, to love and we get really picky, we start thinking about personality and this little thing and that little thing. And that's not the issue. It's an underlying energy that we align ourselves with. And we have to always be trying to do that in one way or another. Just one way or another. How can I love more? And it's not emotional love. It's not just a question of banging the bells and doing the Hare Krishnas or whatever it might be. It's on a much more subtle level. When we have choices to make, what choices do we make? Little simple things. I was remembering when Swamiji created he wrote a blessing for having our meals, and then he put it to music. And so then all of a sudden we're singing the blessing. We were joking about Ananda becomes more and more like living in an operetta. Every time you turn, everybody's breaking out in song one way or another. But just even before you take something to eat, it's such a mundane thing, isn't it? We all eat. Do we really stop? And do we think about a higher vibration? In Rajasi's life, he was Master's most advanced disciple. And he wrote letters, various letters, and he said something about, I tried meditating before I did this, I tried meditating first. And I found it went much better. And I found that if I meditate first before I do this, I find that goes better too. And then if I meditate before I do this, I find that goes better. And what you're really reading there is that before he does anything, he stops and he attunes himself. And this is what Master's telling us. If you attune yourself to me, if before you go grocery shopping, before you have an important business meeting, before you get out of bed in the morning, when you're about to say something and you're not sure whether it's a really good idea, where is Master's consciousness in all of this? How do I stand in relationship to what I'm really, really doing? And if I'm not in relationship to that, that's when you're really in danger. Master says, even if you don't meditate well, one of his most advanced disciples didn't meditate very much. Swami said he knew for a fact she never meditated longer than 30 minutes at a time. She just didn't have the capacity to meditate, but she was one of his most advanced disciples because her consciousness was always with him. And wherever she was and whatever she was doing, she asked to do it in his way, to do it in God's way, to receive. And then what comes into us, and going back to this word power, it's like we have to break the hypnosis of the world that we live in. We have to break the hypnosis of I need this to be happy. This is who I am. When this happens to me now, I can be sad. Or I can take credit for this. It feels good to be loved in this way, to be praised. It's powerful. It's Maya. And we don't get out of Maya just by sort of saying, oh, I think I won't be in it anymore. There's no app that'll actually get us out of it. There's probably quite a few that it can remind us to consider it. But sooner or later, we have to be lifted. We have to be infused. We have to be changed by God who loves us if we open ourselves to Him. And we don't open ourselves, we don't receive God for a lot of reasons. The main reason is we're just so busy sustaining who we already are. We're so busy justifying it, we're so busy reinforcing it, we're so busy celebrating it, we're so busy protecting it, we're so busy explaining why it's so hard to get out of it, just all these different things. But what God wants of us, if we love Him, He gives us the discernment. If we then receive Him, He gives us the power. And it gets really simple. That's where the pure in heart comes from. What am I doing here? Why was I born? I read a young friend of mine was thanking her parents for what she'd learned from them. And she said, you taught me to always make the main thing the main thing. And that was just such a sort of homey way to put it, but it's really true. What is the main thing that's going on here? Am I really here to accomplish this or that, or to stand up for my rights, or to make you understand? What is the main thing? The main thing is that I'm here to be in tune. And to be in tune means to stop and remember. Master, what would you have me do here? What is really going to take me to where I want to go? And then the discernment comes. And then all that habitual capacity to think and reason and act and be creative and do what we want to do, it all comes back. You see, the love and the discernment are not separated. But if we merely use our discrimination from our intellects, then we tend to make self-perpetuating decisions. When we love first, ask God, what do I do? How do I do it? And then we just go ahead and do our best. Because we're guided much more than we realize. We don't, most of the time, know where our ideas are coming from. It's like the blessing over the food. If you stop before you just gobble up what's in front of you, and sing Swami's little blessing or say whatever blessing you want, but in some way stop and realize it isn't really this food that sustains my body. It's the divine power that is activated when I take in this nutritious substance. And is this really a nutritious substance, or is this just something that I found somewhere that now I can have? But we should say a blessing over every significant act that we do. Lord, bless this action. Make me your instruments. Don't, free me from, let no impurity of greed defile what I'm about to do. Greed for myself. That's what attunement is to just always be asking. It's not really that complicated, except that we have to constantly remember. We're here together, Lord, and then that's where the love comes in. If you love someone, you always want them to be with you, don't you? I mean, that's the nature of it. You enjoy that vibration, you always want that company. So if we love God, we naturally always want His company. Oh, we're going to go to the grocery store today. We're going off to the office. We're going to meet my horrible boss, and we're going to see what he's going to say today. What's going to happen this particular day? I have this project. How am I supposed to do it? Say that grace over it. Attune yourself, and then the power will come in you. And the bonds of Maya, which hold us so deep, they can be broken because the power of God is greater. And that's the power that Master will give us if we receive Him. God bless you.